Jason, welcome to our Innovation Foundation. And I am so looking forward to this because I know data is so important to everything we're doing in customer experience because, gone are the days where gut feel got you by. And now it's all about data and using data, real data to tell stories and understand, the influence. So, Jason, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. Pleasure to be here. It's great to have this audience with everyone on the bridge. Thank you for taking the time to join. Really, hoping that you'll find this informative, if not a little bit educational and hopefully enlightening. And so I'm not going to waste too much time. I'm going to jump right in. I want to give everyone a chance to participate in this conversation. We know that data has become so important to every aspect of our life. And I wanted to really zoom in a little bit and talk a little bit about data specifically around the concept of what who owns your VOC program, right? Voice of Customer has always been one of those sort of programs that have been sort of on the outskirts of being influential. Number one, obviously, in terms of when we look at data, the most important data that brands seem to care about, and as well they should, is the financials. But behind that, what's second, right? And customer data seems to be very important. A big part of this historically was the voice of customer programs that were out there. So I wanted to start by just having a quick poll, have a few of the folks that are here already tell me who owns your company's VOC program. For example, one of the things is it owned by you? Do you and your team own it? Or does another department own it? Or does no one really own it and folks are just, doing what they do based on what they need to do at any particular time? So feel free to jump in. You can speak, you can answer in the chat. I'd love to hear what you're saying. So feel free to jump in and just talk. And or if you don't feel comfortable, like I said, you can answer via chat.
Yeah, Angie talked about different people own it and they collaborate with them, but Andrew talked about no one really owns it.
Yeah,
Yeah, Rohan said many owners. There's a couple,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So Angie and Andrew, thank you for participating. And that's really where we find the issue with much of the data that is being acquired now. There really isn't a very clear delineated line about who owns what and where sort of ownership begins and ends. And so that's a really difficult thing that we've seen. Now, related to that, one of the things that we're often challenged by is acquiring influence. So everyone in their job in today's day and age is looking to increase their level of influence, right? And of course, at the beginning of all this, access to data is really today more than ever sort of the key to acquiring influence. However, we have to start with, before you have access to budget, right, which is where influence really hits the road, how does that journey start? And it really starts with having access to data. And then from there, the next question becomes, what goes next? Once you have access to data, the next piece is actually taking ownership of that data. And then from there, being able to then, because you own that data, you can manipulate it and analyze it in many different ways in order to tell a compelling story. And that story can be so persuasive that it brings you into the council of leadership. And that's where you get that access to then have the conversation to influence budget and decision making. And this is really the road that many organizations have laid out for folks that want to become influencers. This is the road that you need to travel in order to get there. With that being said, Sean mentioned this at the beginning, and I really want to reiterate this. Data-driven leaders just didn't emerge. It's been an evolutionary sort of practice. And what I mean by that is that 15 years ago, most folks were making decisions based on their gut feel, and their gut feel was influenced by their years of service. I've been in the industry for so long, I know what's best. However, over time, what we have seen is in the last 15 years, there's been a rise of the data driven leader. And now these folks are the ones that have leadership ears. And they are the ones that are able to influence decisions and budget and the direction of the organization. And that is why data has become so important. So when we really think about this concept, what we really, the conclusion that we need to all come to grips with is that without access to data, your influence is really limited. And so, in order to open the doors of influence, data is the key to unlocking that. I'm going to throw in a second poll question just to get folks that just joined into the conversation as well. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to using customer data? Is it getting access to the data? Is it integration, integrating data from different sources to tell a complete or holistic story? Number three, is it leadership buy-in? Or number four, is it trust in the data?
Got an answer number two, integration. Three, another number two.
Mhm.
Steven said all of the above.
Yep. And that's you see, and that's the challenge, right? And here's the story I'm going to tell today. And this is the story I really wanted to focus our attention on. All of these things are integrated and a part of a more complex situation that's taking place in organizations today. So let's unravel this conversation a little bit. Whether you like it or not, much of your data today is gated. Okay. And this is problematic because you don't have free reign, free access to the data. What does that mean? What it means simply is the folks who own the data control who can access it. Not only do they control who can access it, they control what format it is available to you in. And these two things influence how you can use the data. Limited access and only in a single format really limits your ability to transform that data into insights and actionable recommendations and a story that can influence leadership. And that's really a big part of the struggle, is that most folks have access to data, but their access to the data is limited. And sometimes they don't even know that it's limited because they only know what data they have access to. They don't know what is behind the curtain and what other information they could have access to that they're not privy to. And then much of the data is delivered in dashboards, right? Okay, here's your dashboard with the data. And that dashboard is usually created by someone who doesn't have very much interest in what your business challenges are. Their main interest is just getting you the data as quickly as possible and then moving on to their next project. As a result, these two things conspire to render the data that you have access to as more limiting than actually you would want it to be. And that really, at the end of the day, is the key challenge. So when we talk about this, what we need to understand is what is our challenge. And it's not that we want access to all data, because not all data is equally important. Some data is much more important than other pieces of data. So, how do we know what data is more important and what data is less important? So, what data should be fighting for in order to get access to? Well, the data that answers some key important questions. I mentioned earlier, financial data is absolutely key. But beyond financial data, we're going to look at what other types of data matter. So, the first thing is data that tells you what the company is doing to make customers happy and what the company is doing to frustrate customers. And perhaps most importantly, what you can do about it. Data that can answer these three questions are absolutely immensely valuable. And so this is the data that you need to have in hand in order to gain influence. So the next thing we need to understand is what do we need in order to get the answers to those three questions? What data do we need in order to answer those three questions? We need to understand, first of all, who is the customer? For example, there are many different types of customers that your company may service. Not all of them are equally important, but you need to be able to segment them by the customers you care most about, the customers that spend the most, the customers that you're planning to grow. All of these things matter, and it falls under this umbrella of who is the customer. The second piece of data that you need is how are they interacting with the brand? What channels do they use? What types of questions do they try to answer? How and why are they communicating? And then the third, and perhaps the most important, is how do your customers feel when they interact with your brand? Why I say this is the most important is simply because customers make decisions based on how they feel. So let's unpack that a little bit. First of all, customers are simply not rational. What do we mean by that? This is a very contentious word, non-rational. And people tend to take this as an affront to who they are. But actually, not being rational means that you don't look at every aspect of every point of every interaction or every part of the product to determine how you feel. You take shortcuts. That's all being non-rational means. And today, there is so much information out there, number one, and there's so many ways customers interact with the brand. It's almost impossible to make a quote unquote rational decision. You have to take shortcuts. So, what do these shortcuts generally entail? Well, at the end of the day, most of these shortcuts are nested in how customers feel when they interact with representatives of the brand or when they use the product. It's these feelings that we are nurturing. And this is why they are so important. They are important because they are the most important shortcuts. customers take when they're making a decision how they feel about a brand. 22 times. I want you to remember this. This is a very important number. And I'm going to tell you why it's important. It's related to the conversation we've just been having. When we talk about a brand interaction with a customer, what we have known for a long time is that your most recent positive interaction is 22 times more likely to increase customer loyalty than just an average okay interaction or a negative interaction. And at the end of the day, it's that these interactions are where the customer's relationship is either built or destroyed. And this then becomes an absolute pivotal part of the conversation. These interactions are what makes and breaks relationships between customers and brands. And the better these interactions are, the more likely we are to gain a loyal following. And the less positive these interactions are, the less likely we are to gain a loyal customer. And that number, 22 times, is a big number. It should not be looked at trivially. So, time for our third and final poll question. Okay. Do you have data that is connected across multiple sources? What do we mean by this? For example, do you have data that tells you how the customer feels, as well as what they're doing and who they are? Right? So do you have data that tells a holistic story? Okay. And not only across one point in time, but across the entire history of the customer relationship with that brand. These are the types of connected data that makes uncovering a story that is most persuasive, but also actionable. And this is the type of data you need to make that a reality. So when we look at this, there's simply no. Maybe you're connected to 2 sources or 3, or maybe more. So the question out there is, are you using connected data, or do you have to go to different places in order to stitch data together that are hosted in different sources in order to tell a complete story? Or do you not even have access to that data?
So Matt said number 2, couple of sources.
Jay Meyer, you work with a number of different brands. How are some of the your big customers dealing with these customers? Yeah, you try to
Yeah,
align
I
it.
should probably unmute for that, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'm observing this dialogue from kind of the agency side of the fence. So
Yeah.
it really there are a lot of variables in play, of course. I can speak to it from the context of um, realms in which we have tremendous control. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
where we're doing product development, either independent of an existing organization's brand or in part with an organization's brand. In many cases, you can create um, data aggregation hubs
Yep.
alongside product development that can, in many times, use existing redundancies either through API integration or through latent data sources in a specific vertical in order to vet and authenticate data, get a better and clearer picture, of course. And anytime you can get three or more redundant data streams in place
Yes.
to give you clarity, and particularly we'd like to do it from what I would characterize as parallel non-competitive verticals
Yep.
that have, attuning characteristics that align with your core audience. It gives you a little more dimension
Yeah.
on understanding that customer life cycle.
Absolutely. Angie, if you're still on the bridge, I haven't seen you. How many sources of data do you guys try to integrate together in order to sort of tell that complete story?
So we call them the Fly Five.
Yeah.
Fly five pieces of data, which includes voice of customer,
Mhm.
mystery shopper program, plus workplace safety and health and sanitation, and all of those are streamlined into a dashboard on a Tableau.
Yes.
And then we're able to use it to tell stories or to present to clients and QBRs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't you find it, isn't it interesting when you have those pieces of data connected, how much better a story you're able to tell? It's almost like it's so revealing, right? Because you can look at the data from different angles and get to the answer to the why question. Why is this happening much more effectively? Would you not agree?
Definitely agree with that, especially, a lot of our clients and executives, obviously they don't really care about the granular,
Yes.
but they want to see or visualize. A lot of people are visual, how
Yes.
things relate to each other. And obviously we see patterns, right? Where
Yes.
one area supports the other, and we're able
Yep.
to make proactive decisions around that sort of data. So yeah, it's very fascinating. It's very empowering, I should say. That's a good word.
Yeah. And it's funny because once you start to connect this data together, what happens is intuitively you go from being reactive to being proactive. And the more sources of data you get to put together, the more proactive you can be. And that to me is one of the power data provides, is that it allows you to go from being reactive to being proactive. And you can tell a very persuasive story to gain influence and decision making authority by using data effectively in that manner. Bob, are you on the bridge still? Bob uses data more on the front side as opposed to the back side to nurture and to bring in sort of, opportunities. Bob, how do you find how difficult it is, especially, and I know it's difficult on the front end, to get data aggregated and connected?
It can be a challenge, as you well know, Jason. It's but for us, a lot of what we've done with the data too. You talk about it so much as in terms of data-driven leadership and the gut feel in terms of making those business decisions, but in my experience, it's been so critical for the to be data driven in marketing as well. The
Yeah.
content marketing that we need. It's
Yes.
not enough for us to just say, well, this person, this CEO thinks that or thinks this.
Yep.
Having some data behind the beliefs in order to create the insights that begin to differentiate the brand. I personally have been done a lot more work there than
Yeah.
on the customer experience side, as you know.
Yeah, and Bob, that's really interesting because here's the thing. A lot of times marketing, we cannot very easily connect it to an ROI number, right? Especially from front of it. But it's very sexy work, right? But a lot of times, if you can't connect it to an ROI, you can do really creative things and you can do really, immensely popular things. But if you can't connect that back to an ROI, you're really stuck. Because when leadership comes back and it's like, okay, we spent all this money, should we continue spending this money? And if you can't answer that question, then that's where the rubber really meets the road. And so you need multiple sources, especially top of funnel, to be able to sort of not even understand, but understand and transmit that story back to leadership. Would you agree,
Yeah.
Bob?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you just dial back a number of years, that same challenge probably was felt by the customer service department, right?
Yes.
Without the ability to know the history and life cycle of a client,
Yeah.
if you wanted to go back 10 or 15 years, how do I know what I'm spending in customer service
Mhm.
is really making a difference? If I don't have that data, then customer service is just a place to fix the problems
Correct.
that we have with our particular service or product. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that because the most innovative companies that we work with have slowly been transforming sort of customer support into customer support and sales, right? Where they're using that data to understand the life cycle of the current product the customer is using and to help them identify opportunities for their next purchase, right? And it's a very slippery slope, but if you get the balance right, it turns customer support into a revenue generating center, not simply seen as a cost center. But you have to do it very carefully because if you don't do it carefully, you have the ability to alienate your customers very quickly because they'll see you as just simply pushing for more sales as opposed to nurturing the relationship. And that's, sometimes companies get so enamored by the ability to transform customer support into a revenue generating center, they don't understand how to optimally operate in that arena.
Yep.
And Jay, you're absolutely right, right? 1/7. The cost of acquisition is very expensive today, no doubt about it. So let's continue our conversation. This has been really good. I hope we're at least engaging, and you see why this is so important. So let's talk a little bit about sort of what my mantra is when it comes to customer experience, right? And it really is owning and activating the right customer data is your path to strategic impact. So if you're looking to increase in your influence, your personal influence within an organization, right? Using customer data is one of the paths that can lead you to that outcome. Now, one of the ways you can do this is the very nondescript manner is by building control of the VOC program within your company, right? You establish yourself as a critical driver of growth and decision making by doing that. And you have to take it, you have to have an approach. And my approach was always start small, think big, and let the data speak for your value. And so I want to really talk about how VOC programs are evolving in today's new world. Okay. And what I want to talk about is when you own this data that explains the most critical customer moments based on the data that we have 22 times, right? Those interactions really matter. You don't just report on customer experience, you actually are able to shape it. And that is what makes you indispensable. It's not the data for data's sake. It's the data to shape the experience that makes you indispensable. And that's the challenge that many VOC programs have not wrapped their head around. They just collect the data to say we have a number, right? It's more than that. And so let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. It looks like a persuasive story, right? So here's how this story unpacks itself. 50% of customers are visiting or interacting with your brand for something related to product X. 75% of these customers actually need support. And when you deliver support to these folks, only 63% of these customers are satisfied. Now, this can go for operations or this can go for marketing. You have to start by being able to understand these 3 data points: what they're looking for, right? How they're interacting, and how they feel. This is not the end. This is the beginning of the conversation of building a persuasive story. Most people look at this as the finish line, but it's actually the starting point. This is the foundation. When you build your VOC program on this foundation, you're going to be far more successful than simply a number. So here's the challenge, though. I'm going to throw the monkey wrench into the pond, and I'm going to talk to you about the challenge. And this challenge is all about low and declining responses. Customers are less willing to provide feedback because they're just too busy. Okay, they don't have the time. Okay, post-transactional feedback, generally speaking, because we do a lot of these, our response rates are between 10 and 20%, which is really good industry-wide, but still, it's not enough. Website feedback is even lower at 5% and dropping. So you know that you may be gathering feedback, but is it enough to dig in to uncover the story? And this is where AI comes in. AI is really there, and this is the fundamental value of AI. It's there to bridge the gap. And to bridge the gap, and the gap that's been created around not enough information about how customers feel. We have a ton of information about what they're doing, right? Where they're going. We have some information about who they are, but we're really struggling on how do they feel? And how they feel is so important. And you know why it's important, because it is the shortcut that customers take when it comes to their decision around how they feel about a brand. So let me introduce you to some of the latest AI. It's a simple icon, right, that can fit on any marketing content website or any customer support website, but it has so much applications. But that's not important. What's important is what it does. So I can simply click this icon.
Hey.
Tell me about what you do.
Hey, how can I help? I'm Jason's virtual assistant. Jason is the CEO of Bespoke CX, and we specialize in helping clients build deeper customer relationships by improving their customer experience. We do this through data collection, connection, analysis, and reporting. Is there something specific you'd like to know or discuss?
Yes, I'd like to make an appointment to see Jason.
Great. I can help you with that. Before we proceed, let me confirm a few details to ensure everything is accurate. Can you please provide your first name, last name, and email address? If you'd like, you can also share your phone number.
You know what? I don't want to book an appointment. I just want to leave some feedback about your website.
Got it. I'd be happy to take your feedback about the website. Could you share what you'd like to say, and I'll make sure it gets passed along to Jason?
Absolutely. Your website's very slow.
Thank you for sharing that feedback about the website being slow. I'll make sure to pass this along to Jason so it can be addressed. Is there anything else you'd like to share or discuss?
No, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your feedback and have a great day.
Okay. So you can imagine the different applications that this can be used for, right? It's not just about capturing feedback. It's about tools that improve the customer experience to help guide a customer through a journey. But it's also about uncovering insights. Let me give you an example, okay? You can use tools like this using AI to actually have the conversation, or you can actually have agents having this conversation directly with the customer. Okay. And then evaluating these conversations at scale. So it's not about coaching anymore. It's not about, oh, okay, I'm going to do one in every 100 interactions. No, we can actually evaluate every single interaction to understand the emotional state of the customer. We can use both the words that they say or type along with the tone that they use to determine whether the customer is frustrated, they have a sense of relief after the conversation, they're anxious or ecstatic, and so many different dimensions we can measure by looking at the tone and the words that they use. At the same time, we can also evaluate the agent themselves. So say, for example, this was a live person. We can analyze that live person to determine whether or not they're communicating in a professional manner. Are they knowledgeable about the products and services they are supposed to support? Are they empathetic and friendly? So these are all ways to now capture feedback without surveys. And this is the power of AI technology. And this is where it intersects most effectively with CX. It's not just about the tools, but the ability to analyze large sets of data completely and extract the emotional state of the customers without having to ask them to complete a survey. And that's the future. And that's really what our platform does. It combines AI solutions to help the customer through their journey. It's a VOC plus platform that does more than just collect feedback. It collects information about who the customer is and what they're doing in real time, and then allows you to integrate that into all your other tech stack data. And you can put together a Tableau report, right, with that data. And it's also about program management to understand how to implement and how to maintain these new programs, because they're going to be much more sophisticated than they ever have been in the past. And that's really what our organization does. And that's how we stand out from the crowd. Now, if you want to chat some more, you can certainly book a 60-minute chat and bring your business challenges with you so we can discuss strategy and tactics to help understand not necessarily simply how to improve CX, but how to improve CX in a way where you bring the right data into the mix in order to improve your influence and your ability to lead conversations moving forward. Because the future is AI driven, but beyond that, it is data driven, and data about customers' emotions are going to be more and more important than they ever have been before. Not simply because we can do it, but because of the influence that emotional state that the customer has when they interact with a brand has on how they feel and the decisions they make about the relationship they will have moving forward with that company. And so I'm going to wrap this up and I'm going to open it up for questions. And feel free to ask about this topic or about data in general, AI, anything that you'd like to chat about.
All right. Well, Jason, thank you so much. This was some really great content, and thank you for creating such an engaging session as well. You know, as you discussed, this is challenging work. I mean, you got all these different disparate owners. I think several said that, the owners are spread out. You've got a lot of challenges with that. It's got to be pretty complex. So when you think about how many resources across an organization they really need to bring together to accomplish something this mature. I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the misnomer. Okay, there's internal resources and there's external resources. The internal resources are very expensive for a company. Okay, not only to get them to engage on a particular project, but also to get them to do the things that they need to do in order to maintain any solution that they've created. So they may come in and build a solution, and then they still have, and maybe that solution in a year from now needs to be updated. And then getting them to come back to do that is a very expensive proposition, not only from a timing perspective, but also from the time you're losing because you're using something that is suboptimal. Where these solutions really work effectively is when they are implemented by partners who understand the ecosystem and how this data works and your business challenges. Now, implementing a solution as simply as a chatbot like this with the analytics in the background not only cuts down cost. We're talking, anywhere between 15 to 30,000 depending on how you execute it across what channels, etc. But we're not talking about a heavy lift. And we're also since most of these environments are digital, we're talking simply one line of code to put into your website or your chatbot or all of these things can be executed with one line of code, and then it gets maintained and the company is now responsible to you. And that's the key, because a lot of times when you have resources internally that are responsible for this, the question becomes who owns the data, right? And what are they willing to give you and how they're going to give it to you. And what their vision of what they want to give you versus your vision of what you need often doesn't intersect. And so to answer your question, for getting this type of solution in place, you're talking about a very small price, less than a single employee, right? When you're thinking of a call center, right? An agent in a call center, you're talking about less than an employee to give you not only the ability to interact, but the analytics and the knowledge behind it to make better decisions across time.
Amazing. Well, I want to make sure we definitely have time. So opening it up to the floor, if you'd like to ask a question, Tracy, I saw you came off of onto video. So if maybe you've got a question, just unmute and ask away. No?
No, I don't. I apologize. I missed this meeting, so I just
Tracy, you missed the meeting.
I did. I missed the meeting. I just heard your last 5 minutes spiel. I do apologize.
It's nice to see your face, though. It's nice to see your face.
I am. I'm a fan of CX Rocks. So there you go. I've joined the community.
Awesome. Well, the recording will be made available very quickly. So any other questions? I know, Jay, you made a comment here on the chat about doing an implementation right now that uses facial recognition to drive the interaction and can basically figure out the body language, which, yeah, it's another use case, right, of how AI is changing how we do. And part of what we've been talking a lot about is, CX is at this inflection point, customer experience. And we're seeing a position where AI is going to change everything we know and we thought we knew before. But obviously, this wasn't just really a session about AI, but data is the key to that as well. This evolution is about using data in different ways, including AI and others, to drive that change.
Yeah.
Any questions from everybody? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, it's all about the adding dimensionality to the data that we're getting. So it's always been about storytelling around the metadata, right? What is the metadata really telling us? And one of the powerful things that's happening with all the tools that are being added into the bailiwick through AI and ML, of course, is that it just gives us new inputs, right? So then the question becomes, how do we harness all of these new inputs to, well, let me walk it back a little bit. Like I would say maybe it's 15 years ago or so, we really started to, in earnest, make a transition away from brand. I mean, the data has always been there. It's just about how you've
Yep.
got it, right? So it was either analog with people running or scurrying around trying to gather research to,
Mhm.
then there was the internet and other mechanisms for garnering data and input. And we've always had great resources right around that, and especially in the marketing world, like Gartner and Forrester and
Yep.
other sources that are, verifiable. But the real change, the transformative change, in my view, came when we moved away from monologue-based interactions with the consumer audience
Yep.
along a linear time path, of a linear view of life cycle, to one that's more cyclical and also a actual dialogue.
Yes.
And so the beauty of AI is, of course, and Jason, I think you were very perfectly pointed this out, is that it's not about replacing anything,
Yeah.
that it duplicates it creates a multiplication of your reach into
Yes.
the customer experience. And because of the quality of material that's coming back from AI now, we're able to do that in a way that's feels less synthetic. I think,
Yes.
I laughingly refer back to the old, I call the first implementation of AI is Microsoft's paperclip, right? It's just
Yeah.
the
It's
most
so true.
annoying
Yeah.
thing in
It didn't last very long, but yes, it was.
yeah, right. Because it was annoying.
Yes.
I was going to say, one of the most important things you had indicated, I think it was 85% or maybe it was 65% of consumers value touch, right?
Yes.
At the point of decision or knowing when.
Yes. Human
I, I
touch.
would I would argue that it's 100%,
Yeah.
but it's about soft touch. It's the right touch, the right
Yes.
time, and the right tone. And, because there are varying degrees of so what I would call it, characterize the smell of the cell, so to speak. So you have to really understand the nature of the consumer. The only way you can do that is to increase human-like interaction with them in a natural and passive way where it's invoked by the consumer, as opposed to being rammed down their throat. And
Yes.
you can use these technologies like avatars, which have come,
Yeah.
man, just in the because we've been touching this topic, tip of the spear for the last 5 or 6 years now, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I mean, just in the last 24 months, I would say what can be done with human-like interaction in an AI environment is probably 300 times what it was, uh,
Yeah.
24 months ago. And I mean, we're heading at like rocket speed toward AGI as well.
Yes.
So, I mean, I won't go on and on and on the topic, but this recent implementation we're doing, we couldn't even do it. Well, I think the first time we postulated the idea of simulating emotional reaction via interpretive body language
Yep.
recording, uh, and we built a rig to do this to simulate it with Will I Am
Mhm.
in 2020,
Yeah.
but we couldn't implement it. We couldn't.
Yeah.
It was like the processing power, the data wasn't there. Uh,
Processing power.
Fluidity,
Yes.
yeah, right. That's it.
Yeah.
Um, and now we're finally able to do it. We're doing it in an implementation in the real estate vertical.
Yep.
Um, and I mean, I think we're still going to see continued growth and expansion of what's possible.
Yeah. And I know a little bit about that Will I Am implementation. I won't give that away too much, but
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. But it's the processing power that gives you access to more. The scale of data that you have available to you is unbelievable now.
Well,
And
yeah,
in
it's
terms of
insane.
analysis, yeah.
Well, look at what's happening. We're going to be in quantum computing in no time.
Yes.
That's,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like Brave New World
Yeah.
level uh exponential impact on everything we're talking about.
Yeah. This is the enterprise starship that
Yeah. Yeah.
literally that level. And so the data that's available to you from a CX perspective, it's not about creating tools that push this down your throat. And you mentioned that earlier, Jay, and this is a very important point. Customers never like things being pushed down their throat. They never have. Okay. Now, the thing is that we see again and again is that AI its initial implementation will always be around cost savings. I'll tell you this right now. Every conversation is going to be about cost savings. It's the wrong conversation to be had. The conversation is not about cost savings. The conversation needs to be nurturing a deeper, more meaningful relationship, and how to ensure that you're putting the right connectors together to create that more dynamic relationship. And what AI allows you to do is to measure that at scale, right? What are you doing at the right time? Are you doing it at the right time? And so many, the fear, and I think it was Bill Gates came out of like 12 months ago or something and said, oh, AI is going to change the nature of work, which is a very powerful statement, right? But how that was read is that AI is going to change how many people are employed, right? And which is the wrong way to look at this. No. The skill set is going to be different, but it's the need to analyze this data is and understand this data is still going to be there in my mind.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest, that didn't happen with the Industrial Revolution, and it's not going to happen now.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will always need people, and our customers will demand people for sure. So the more technology we throw at them, the more they're going to want to talk to somebody. But it's also, I like to talk to, when I talk to companies, it's also the opportunity to say, the more access we have, the more we can go back to the old school of having and talking to our customers. Yep. Actual kind of interviews and market research, and not just doing everything like a survey or at scale. It will give us that opportunity. If we take just a bit of that kind of savings and efficiency that we gain out of the technology and put it back to connecting with the customer, that'll be actually so much more value. And so to the point you talked earlier, Jason, about companies that are going to, they're going to just focus on efficiency. Well, they're going to lose out on the connectivity because their focus is in the wrong area. Those that take a more collaborative approach where they're saying, hey, we are going to get some efficiency, but we're not going to give it all back to the business. We're going to use some of that specifically for the customer, make those connections, have those conversations to really make sure that, again, going back to what you said about emotion, making sure we understand the emotion. Yep. Even doing that through AI and studying transcripts or body language or anything else, it doesn't replace conversations. No. And it's that opportunity to leverage that. Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't want to. You don't want the relation. You know what? A loyal customer is a customer you have a relationship with, period.
Exactly.
Right. And so at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we're continually sort of driving that message home. AI is not a replacement for, right? And I think that's when, and I often say this, and I hope there's no IT folks in the room, but if IT grabs their hand around AI and owns the AI conversation, this immediately becomes a cost-saving exercise. But there's so much more richness that is possible if we take it simply out of the realm of simply cost savings. And so I think that's the goal of folks that are manning the AI flag, right? Our job is to make sure that conversation does not get controlled by IT. There has to be a more democratic conversation that is far more effective about holistically building a deeper relationship with the customer.
Absolutely. I can't think of a better quote to end on than that one right now. Deeper relationship on the customer from that perspective. So anyway, thank you all for joining us today. It was a great session, great interaction. Appreciate your participation in that. And again, see us at the next event. We've got one next Thursday that I'll be running. We've got a brand new platform we're building around the collective, the CX on the Rocks collective. And I really am happy to show, I'm so excited to show it off. And so how you'll get access to recordings and interact with other members and things like that. Exciting time coming as well. That's next up. And then we got our next monthly meeting on April 15th. So look forward to seeing you guys on one of the next sessions. Jason, thank you again. Great content. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.